Welcome to the Land to Lots podcast, powered by Launch Development Finance Advisors. And now your host, Carter Froelich.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Land to Lots podcast. My name is Carter Froelich, and it's great to be before you again today. And as discussed in podcast 30, when I said that we were going to be speaking with the developer of the project that was being financed by Texas's first forward funding MUD capital appreciation bond, I meant it. And I am so privileged today to have my good friend and client, Randy Rollo, the president of Randolph, Texas Development, joining us to talk about the transaction that was closed on June 29th of 2023, which represented the first MUD forward funding capital appreciation bond. And Randy, welcome to the show.
Well, glad to be here, Carter. It's been an interesting journey, to say the least.
Yeah, it has. And that's what we're going to dig in today here, Randy. And first of all, I just really like to say thank you. And for our listeners, Randy and I have known each other for quite a long time. We met when we were on a Urban Land Institute Community Development Council meeting. And we've known each other for about 5 or 6 years. We've always enjoyed one another's company. We have a lot of the same mindsets, and we're always kicking ideas around. And Randy, do you want to add anything to that on how we met and how we think?
Well, I think we're standing in the corner with the other bald-headed guys, but anyway. Carter, we just had like-minded, and we laughed and had a good time and enjoyed each other. But from that, we built a relationship of trust. You understood my story, where I came from, and the challenges that are in front of me of obtaining capital to do some pretty big things. And that started a long time ago, and over and over again, as you came around and we met, we talked about ways of how to get financing. And I think it started with how to finance utilities. Major offsite water and wastewater services to areas that are being unserved. But that's kind of how we dug a little deeper. But and the outcome of it, 5 years later, this is what we came up with. And I'm very appreciative that it was able to cross a bridge that was very difficult.
Yeah, and Randy, you brought up a lot of things there, and maybe before we jump in, you can give the listeners a little bit of background, without getting into extensive detail, because you mentioned something that's very important, and that's how are private developers financing larger and larger projects. And you've been in the industry for a long time, but if you just want to share a little bit about your background and then about your company and the type of projects that you're currently developing.
I'm going to share my age a little bit here, but I started home building in 1982 in Houston, Texas, for a major home builder at the time called Jim Craft Homes. And I was young, out of college, and married to my high school girl, and needed a job. So I had construction background in the family and stuff, but I'm an animal science major. So how did I get into home building? I needed a job and things were booming. But I enjoyed it. I love the company I worked for. It was a good time in my life. And so I went from superintendent to a project manager to a division president in a few short years. And 1986, I was transferred to open up Austin division, and I've been here ever since. And then there worked for a couple other builders, sold a building company, and I've been region president for 2 public home builders. And 2 public home builders kind of makes you want to go to work for yourself, so I did. So I know that it's different ways if that's good or bad or not. But anyway, nonetheless, had my own home building company and had a good time and faced the challenges that go along with it. So, however, back in 2012, lots were hard to come by. Land was being more difficult. The markets was coming back, and new builders, public and private, were coming to town, and I got invited to help them try to get land positions going. From that, I just found that that's really my niche. That's what I'm good at. I love land. I know things. I've been here for a long time. So that helps. I mean, just from being here and having the relationships. So, back at that time, the first thing I did, I put up a piece of land that I thought was a good piece of land to develop. A few months later, I flipped it, gave my wife a check, and she said, quit building houses. So short time later, I look up and had $30 million worth of raw land that I thought needed to be purchased and developed, and really lacked the experience of knowing how to go out and raise debt and equity. So that was a learning curve. But nonetheless, you kind of work through that process. And then I partnered, and we did 3 developments with a capital partner. And then later on, a few years later, I decided to go on my own and start Randolph, Texas development and focus on a certain area. And at the time, it was a good time for my first son, Grant, to join me. He had experience in Houston in the same line of work. So we started Randolph, Texas. So back in 2015, I contracted for a piece of land in Liberty Hill, Texas, north of Austin. And people thought I was nuts, thought it was too far out. But it was a unique piece of property, very beautiful topography, trees. The reason people moved to the hill country, major transportation of a toll road was in the picture. The school district was strong, growing. Football team went to the state playoffs, so that's the number one goal here in Texas. So
Yeah.
it was a good spot. Total raw land, unentitled, no utilities, ranch land. So then the journey begins. So that's pretty much how it started. But we feel our target market is try to find land that's not being chased by others. We're not a public company. We're not a large nationwide home building division of a development company. So try to find unique opportunities where we feel comfortable that we can add value to the property in the road and understand where the market's headed.
And for our listeners, just to put Randy's comments in context, he is primarily developing projects within the Central Texas area. Is that correct, Randy?
Yes.
And he had alluded to this previously before, but Randy has this distinction of being able to find land that nobody is chasing. And the reason he's able to be able to find this land, at least for me on the outside looking in, is that he has over the years just developed extensive relationships with farmers, ranchers, and families that have held land for extended periods of time. Is that a correct statement, Randy? Is that how you're able to do it? Because I just see it as absolutely a unique ability of yours to be able to locate this property that seemingly nobody else can find.
Well, Carter, that's a great compliment, and I appreciate it. But I used to say that a lot, and I was very proud of it. But the past year or so, land prices have shot up. We got different investors coming to town, and money talks. So, it's challenging. It's more challenging because it's a feeding frenzy's happened around here, like other parts of the country.
Yeah.
So prices have almost tripled, in I guess the past 3 or 4 years. So it makes it more difficult. So sometimes a good relationship helps, but somebody's tripling my price is kind of challenging.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But anyway, but that's still our method, and we still work that, and we do it every day. So it's just but it's and also I think a point too. We look a little bit further out, I think, than a lot of times, and maybe others or home builders do, because they just don't have the time, and the resources to tie something up for that long a period of time. For lots are going to be ready in 4 or 5 or 6 years down the road.
And this is a good segue into the project that we're talking about in the Liberty Hills is obviously the Lariat project. But if you could give the listeners a brief description of some of the challenges and opportunities and challenges that you have experienced or you're currently experiencing as it relates to financing these types of projects, being a private developer.
Yeah, that's a good one. But we found this property. I had another property that we were developed down the road. That was an entry level project that we sold to 2 privates, and it did real good. And I was just driving around and came across this. So it was a ranch. It was a 906-acre ranch that was family owned. It kind of got sold to another developer, came back on the market, sat there for a while. I negotiated with an investment group and bought it on a takedown over 5 years without any utilities, with the contingency that I couldn't close until I got closer to that goal. So it worked out. I had a record of 18 extensions on the contract, but that's my record. But anyway, so it's challenging, but it was a big piece of land, and it was a master plan position to be in. We started off with developing 165 1-acre lots where we could use septic and the availability of water that we could get at the time to really get some cash flow and really set the market up. 1-acre lot communities around us have had strong success, and we liked our piece of land. We liked the topo, and that was a project that's called Northgate Ranch. Mm-hmm. The balance of that was about 700 acres, and probably ended up with 688 usable acres of land, where we did a master plan. RVI was our land planner and very familiar with our market, and we had a fun time designing this project. However, it's very expensive to put this all together. I use a quote from a good friend of mine, a developer down the road. He said, "Yeah, the first lot cost $30 million."
That's about right.
That was a few years ago. I think that's increased quite a bit since then, but that's kind of the problem. So, we went ahead. I was able to, get financing and arrangements to start entitlements. Short version is we were able to get a wastewater discharge permit, which turned into a TLAP permit, but we're capturing water and doing irrigation treatment. That's another story altogether, but we're proud to get that. With that, we're able to go and apply for our MUD application for our own utility district with no protest. So that was a smooth deal. Then we had to go back and negotiate with an adjoining city to bring water for 2,000 units. That took us a long time. The time water is available, but the transportation of that water to our site was very much of a challenge. Things were slow. It took a long time to get that thing done. It took us about 3 years. But the final results were we were able to get a water agreement, for our water. We had to do an extensive water line from point A to point B underneath the highway and underneath the river. So all that being said, there's no way to finance a project like this, in my opinion, and make money for yourself or your investor without public finance. The MUD district, in my opinion, was our best option at this time.
Yep. And in this instance, you'd set up 3 MUDs, one on kind of phase 1 of Lariat, which is MUD number 1, North San Gabriel MUD number 1, and then San Gabriel MUD number 2 was on the Northgate project, the 165 lots, 1-acre lots, and then MUD number 3, which is on kind of the phase 3 or phase 2 portion of the Lariat master plan. The MUD stands for Municipal Utility District. It is a standard financing tool in the state of Texas. The Reader's Digest version of it, for those that are not familiar with Texas, it's an ad valorem based general obligation bond issuing separate political subdivision. So the beauty of it is that it's a separate political subdivision. It has its own appointed board that is generally very, very favorable to the developer. So there's a lot of certainty that as the assessed valuation is created within the boundaries of the district, bonds will be issued and the bond proceeds are utilized to repay the developer, typically for water, sewer, storm drain infrastructure. And some of the MUDs also have road powers and park powers. All of those powers were available for Randy in his Lariat project. The challenge that we have with the MUDs is that we have to wait for the infrastructure to go in. So to Randy's point, we have that $30 million first lot. We have to sell to builders. Then we need to have the builders sell homes, build them, get CFOs, get them on the tax rolls before we're issuing any debt. So while the MUD is very, very favorable and widely used tool, there still is a huge amount of time that goes in between when that first dollar is expended before we're starting to see a significant return of capital back to the developer. With that, and Randy and I had been talking for a lot of time, we kicked around the idea of, hey, Randy, would you ever consider doing this type of transaction? And that type of transaction is what we're calling the MUD forward funding capital appreciation bond. And Randy, when you heard that pitch and you understood the transaction, what made you think, this sounds like it might work out for our project?
Well, it's kind of been a challenge. I think I grew up in Texas. I watched the MUD program come together in the late '70s, early '80s in Houston, and how that worked. I watched developers be very successful and make good financial decisions for themselves. Through this process, it just takes a long time. Things just take longer these days, and so that's kind of the process. But I knew the situation I was in, so a little bit more explanation. We platted over 1,000 lots to get this project started. And the market in 2020 and 2021 was strong. Builders needed lots. Money was available. And fortunately for us, and a blessing was that we were able to sell, 1,067 lots, paper lots at preliminary plat to 3 builders. So builders that we had relationships with that knew what we were doing, had confidence that we were going to follow through with, our program. So, that in itself was a big, strong leap for me to be able to pay off a land banker.
Mm-hmm.
Had a really good land banker that helped me buy the ranch. He was patient, not involved in residential construction or home building, but it worked. That was a big hurdle we made. Then the market was still strong, but I still had to go out and borrow several $1 million for our part of the major infrastructure, a wastewater treatment plant, a water line. So 30 million to get to one lot, mine was 30 million to get to water and wastewater, so go big or go home. So that's kind of what we did. But so, going forward, I was sitting there saying, how do I meet the demand of the second phase? How does Randy raise the capital and equity without giving away the farm, to achieve those goals? So Carter, that's where we started putting our heads together, I believe. So, you have these MUDs coming in, and typically, you're 5, 6 years to 30 years down the road to get all your MUD receivables. I think you were working on it behind the scenes before you even told me, but nonetheless, and things were fine. Money was available. 2020, 2021, there was billions of dollars out there for the loan to developers. It was a pretty good time to go out and seek debt and equity. And that was moving right along. My lender partner and I said, well, heck, instead of doing paper lots again, you got a lot of them on the ground right now. Let's go ahead and move forward with engineering and construction plans for the next phase. And let's sell finished lots. We kind of discussed the program of doing finished lots. And that's where we're headed down the road in early 2022. For those of us who are listening, we all know what happened in 2022. It came to a halt. Things changed. Capital got shut down. Builders weren't buying paper lots. They were giving lots back. No one was buying nothing. So it was just kind of a strange phenomenon that happened that quick. Then Randy said, "Hey, what are we going to do now?" So we continue to move on. We can stay our course to get these lots finished and get it platted. And we do have phase 2 is shovel-ready lots, 567 lots. So and I shared with a few people, back last fall, I said, guys, we've been through this before. We've been through high interest rates before. We're in a strong market. We're in a good market in Austin, Texas. Jobs are coming. People are moving here. I have a feeling come January and early spring, the market's going to change and it's going to be different. And sure enough, it did happen. 2023 was a good spring for a lot of builders, not just here, but across the country. Second quarter 23 was pretty darn strong. And builders' earnings were up. They're high. They had cash. And man, the storm door opened. So we were just getting pounded by, builders who's been here a long time, new builders, public builders, and builders entering the market. So we knew that we needed to do something, and how are we going to finance it?
And when we had kind of, started talking, and you're right, we had been behind the scene. And for those listeners that want to go and get more details in relation to how this financing vehicle was developed, go back and listen to episode 30, where you'll get kind of behind the curtain description of how this all came together. But when Randy and I started talking with one another again, as it related to his first phase, which was the 1,067 lots, which was included within MUD, San Gabriel MUD number 1. Randy and his group had expended roughly about $42 million worth of MUD eligible infrastructure to date, to build the offsite roadways, water, and sewer. The builders were beginning to put in their infrastructure and build model homes. The MUD had not issued any debt as of yet. So we came in and started looking at, what we could do to, in essence, accelerate the future MUD bond issuance that would occur over the next 3 to 5 to 6 years into the cash flow today. So that's ostensibly, what we started doing. That's ultimately what we were able to do. And obviously the rub on this was finding a law firm and working with that law firm so that we could get a tax exempt bond opinion. Because in the past, if a developer, and Randy, I don't know if you'd ever talked to some of the folks, but there is a cottage market of private investors that are willing to buy future MUD receivables, if you will. But the discount rate that they're looking at purchasing that income stream from developers for ranges somewhere between 12 and 16%. And I've always seen transactions being done closer to the 15, 16% range. I see you raising your hand. So yeah, 16%. So it gets to be very, very expensive money. And our whole idea and what we approached Randy with, and he was willing to be the pioneer in Texas to say, yes, let's do this. I'm willing to kind of bet on you guys and to see if we can accelerate the future MUD proceeds into my pro forma now. And that really ultimately is what we ended up doing, Randy, isn't it? I mean, it worked, and you were willing to take a bet on it. This concludes part 1 of our 2-part series with Randy Rollo. Be sure to come back for the conclusion in our next episode. Thank you.
You have been listening to the Land to Lots podcast with Carter Froelich. Follow us wherever you find your podcast to never miss a new episode.